So by now you probably all know about the unreleased Nook's Cranny upgrade for New Horizons, as well as things like the rumoured museum shop which were found within the code of the game. I've covered these extensively on the channel before, but we've never really been able to show off what they would be like as there was nothing concrete available in the files of New Horizons. All we know is that Nintendo might have planned to add them at some point but decided not to. But this isn't true for every unused, unreleased update and feature. Despite the fact that Nintendo never wanted us to see these, there are some that we actually can, and they're fully functional in the game. And it brings up the question, why weren't they added in? Will they ever be added in? Well, I can answer the second question right away, and sadly the answer is no. Despite the fact that there are interesting pieces of content in the files of the game that Nintendo seemingly may have planned to release at some point, they will most likely remain forever unreleased. At the very least though, we have a pretty good idea of what they would have actually been like. A good example would be the unused reactions from past games. Believe it or not, there are several reactions in the files of the games that are fully functional, and people with the ability to hack their Nintendo Switch are able to show these off in-game. To be clear, these aren't mods, as a mod would require all players to have a mod installed to see them. They're 100% there in New Horizons, just inaccessible to the regular player. By the way, leave a like on the video if you would have liked to have used some of these unused reactions. Dolbutsu no Mori over on Tumblr shared all of these, and if you played Animal Crossing New Leaf then you should recognize some of them. They speculate that perhaps these were leftover data from New Leaf, although personally I'm not so sure. Whilst it seems like New Leaf's code might have made it into New Horizons, the game appears to have mostly been made from scratch. Most animations and 3D models certainly were made from scratch or heavily adapted from New Leaf or even Pocket Camp. So in my mind, there was originally some kind of purpose for these reactions. The sweating reaction I believe is actually seen in the game on really hot days, so maybe this one wasn't intended to be used by the player in the reaction menu. My theory is that perhaps these could have originally fit into where we got reactions from group stretching or even the DLC with the 2.0 update. Maybe Nintendo did originally intend to add some of these unused reactions back in, but the new ideas took precedent and they didn't feel like they needed these anymore. I even wonder if perhaps the famous Dr. Shrunk Funk Shuffle reaction, which was by far the most popular in New Leaf, could have been specifically taught by Dr. Shrunk himself in some capacity. Maybe that's why we never got this reaction, since they couldn't really find a way to tie him into the game anymore, with the reactions now being taught by your villagers instead of him. That's all speculation on my part though, but it's good to know that these reactions actually exist in the game. If you ever meet up with players who have Treasure Islands, it's very likely they might actually be sporting some of these reactions, so you could always ask. I think it's such a shame that we didn't get them honestly, especially the Dr. Shrunk Funk Shuffle, which was such an iconic reaction, or an emotion as it was called back in Animal Crossing New Leaf. And whilst I do love all the ones that we ended up getting in this game, it's sad that we didn't get some of these classics, despite the fact that they're literally there in the files of the games fully operational. That makes it even a little bit more difficult to grasp than the idea of potential updates that we could have gotten but we have no evidence for. The same players I mentioned earlier who are able to do things you shouldn't usually be able to do also discovered that it is actually possible to put rugs outdoors, one of the most requested features in New Horizons. Once again, this isn't a mod as I was able to see this for myself without any mods installed, it's just not something we can do without certain tools. As a regular player, we simply don't have the ability to do this, but hackers were able to bypass this and discover the functionality. Now, this is incredibly buggy and most of the rugs glitch out, but to me, this does show that perhaps Nintendo did intend to originally allow us to put these outdoors. It's hard to say for sure, but I can definitely imagine that being the case. Rugs were made into a pretty big thing in this game, but they never really met the full potential that they could have, I feel. I would have loved to have seen this as an update, but it never came. I wonder if perhaps Nintendo felt like we can use so many unique custom designs outdoors that this idea just didn't really fit. I personally don't agree with that logic though, as it would have just given us even more options in terms of designing, something that is never a bad thing in a game which is basically a designing simulator. This feature has to be up there with some of the top most requested though. Sadly, we don't have any evidence of something like bulk crafting being planned, although I wish we did, but it's interesting that at least at some point outdoor rugs could have been a possibility. I think it's fair to say that Nintendo would have made a lot of people happy if they had decided to update this into the game, and personally I would be using it a lot around my island, so I'm a little bit disappointed that the functionality isn't there for normal players. And for those who can access it, it's pretty buggy because Nintendo never really finished this, of course, since we didn't end up getting it as an official update in the game. Another interesting feature that hackers were able to unlock is the ability to drop bugs and fish as items that other players can pick up. Of course, you can display bugs and fish as physical items on your island, but you can't take another player's. But with this functionality unlocked, you actually can. That's right, it's technically possible to trade critters, which just blows my mind. I really don't think Nintendo ever intended for us to be able to actually do this. I can only imagine the reason why this functionality even exists is perhaps for development reasons. We know that Nintendo has a lot of special and fancy tools to make development of their games a lot easier, so maybe that's exactly what this is. Personally, I think it's a good thing that we can't do this. Otherwise, basically one of the biggest goals in the entire game would almost immediately be made redundant through trading. But I can also understand why some people wanted this to be a thing too. Either way, I'm pretty sure that reason is exactly why Nintendo didn't allow this to be actual functionality that normal players can use within the game. So whilst this technically is an unused feature, it's not one that we really could have ever seen as an update in my opinion anyways. Now, I did mention this in a previous video, but I also wanted to quickly touch upon the museum shop that I mentioned briefly at the start of this video. Whilst a long time ago data miners did seemingly find evidence of a museum shop, it seems like this actually ended up being the one that Blathers has when you go talk to him to buy posters. Now, I think a lot of you were hoping that it would have been the shop from Animal Crossing New Leaf, where we could talk to Celeste and buy all kinds of silver tools and other cool things related to the museum. Personally, I would have loved that, and when you look at the layout of the museum, it certainly makes you think that there could have been another room opposite the roost. But sadly, it doesn't seem like Nintendo actually ever planned to add that in, and the shop probably, most likely, was just the one that we've got with Blathers, which I definitely think is a little bit disappointing honestly. That shop with Celeste would have been great, but this seems like an unreleased update that was just a bit of a misunderstanding, not something that Nintendo ever fully really decided to add into the game. Honestly, I'm certain that there's probably a lot of other cut content for Animal Crossing New Horizons that we'll just never know about, but that might actually be a good thing. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people are still disappointed that there's certain updates and features we didn't end up getting throughout the lifespan of New Horizons, so maybe learning about some of these would just lead to more disappointment than happiness. But for me personally, I can't help but be fascinated about some of these unused features and such that I really wish had made it in. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below though, and which one is your favorite. If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to comment Bob's Gang down below so I know you did. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on channel notifications for more.